Okay, welcome everybody. Second session on deep water processes and sediments. My name's Cathy Hollis from the University of Manchester. I'm chairing this session with Zhe Yang, who is also our first speaker. So just as a reminder, all speakers will have 12 minutes. We will give them a 2-minute warning. Please get ready to put your questions in the chat so that we can spend up to about 7 minutes afterwards having some discussion. So whilst you're listening, have a think about questions you'd like to ask. Please, just as a general reminder, no recording. Please just sit and listen, take notes, and enjoy what we have coming up ahead of us. So without further ado, our first speaker, Zhe Yang, a new model for formation of primary dolomite. Would you like to go ahead?
Okay, let's start. Yeah. Morning, everyone. I'm Zhe Yang. In the last year, I just got my doctoral degree, and now I'm working for Beijing Research Institute of Uranium Geology. Today, I'm so glad to show my research work about the hydrothermal primary dolomite in the Rift Basin. Today, I will introduce my research work through the three questions to show what I thought and did. Then I will give several importance of this research. The first question is why focus on hydrothermal primary dolomite? Genetically, natural dolomite can be divided into two families, primary and secondary. Most of dolomites throughout geological records are thought to be secondary. In contrast, primary dolomite is restricted to modern hypersaline environment, and most of them are thought to be formed by microbial introduction. However, hydrothermal fluids widely along active faults are known to have considerable potential, forming dolomite sediment that inform open spaces. Mechanism-rich hydrothermal fluids at depths can provide chemical basis for dolomite precipitation. Besides, in the past 20 years, many lab experience have successfully synthesized dolomite at temperature above 150 degrees. Elevated temperature favors forming of well-ordered and stoichiometric dolomite. Thus, the role of hydrothermal fluids at high temperatures can't be ignored on forming primary dolomite. Okay, in the modern mid-ocean ridge and continental rift lake sightings, carbonate precipitates formed by subaqueous hydrothermal venting have provided strong evidence for a close relationship between hydrothermal activities and primary carbonates. So a question was raised: if with a favorable fluid composition and environment, are any primary dolomite formed by hydrothermal venting and recorded? Fortunately, we found this kind of dolomite in the northern China. So what are the character of this kind of the dolomite? Hydrothermal primary dolomite we studied were from the early Cretaceous in the westernmost Orrin Basin that deposited during the rifting. Dolomite are restricted to 2 synclinal fault rows and up to 300 meters thick. These dolomites are frequently interbedded with mudstone in a semi and deep lacustrine environment. 3 main laser fishes are recognized with the dolomite: laminated and bonded dolomite as fishes A, argillaceous dolomite, including a great many white granule of zeolite as fishes B, and dark argillaceous dolomites as fishes C. These fishes are repeated in strata. Abundant thin sedimentary textures are observed in dolomites, like soft deformation and thin sedimentary pressures and granulars. There is no evidence of any precursor minerals and residual texture. All this indicates that dolomites are sedimentary rather than their genetic. All laser fishes are composed of from dolomite, zeolite, albite, and and associated with minor magnesite and pyrite. Dolomites formed at 100 and 270 degree, and their light over 300 degree, both in high salinity over 10%. Their light forming at higher temperature and salinity than dolomite suggest properties of hydrothermal bronze should involved during mineral formation. Features A dolomite at the highest temperature are the best ordered and most stoichiometric, consistent with the strong influence of temperature on dolomite mineralogical features in lab experience. So after knowing characteristic of the hydrothermal primary dolomites, how this kind of dolomite forms has become the key of this research. Firstly, a question carefully thought is how hydrothermal fluids evolve to form different lithofacies. Here we use several geochemical methods to reflect the changes of hydrothermal fluids. Rare earth elements of hydrothermal bronze show different with those of lake water. Dolomites inherit some characters of both hydrothermal bronze and lake water. That means dolomite formed from mixed fluids, and late-stage dolomite sediments in fractures can also prove the idea of mixing. Strong isotopics of dolomite are really high. Such radiogenic signatures indicate interaction of hydrothermal fluids with continental basement. The increase in strontium isotopics through fishes A to C support progress in incorporation of lake water within hydrothermal circulation. Besides the temperature reduction due to increase in the radius of lake water result in progressive increase of oxygen isotopes within fishes A and 2C. Meanwhile, the lower temperature enables more CO2 to be dissolved and then discussed from fluid mixture, giving significant higher carbon isotopes in fishes C. In laminin within fishes A, a portion of dolomite show covariation of temperature and salinity, which crystallized from mixture comprising 10 to 45% lake water, but other sand of dolomites with wide range of salinity crystallized mainly from hydrothermal bronze. Occurring of two groups of dolomite reveal that primary dolomite precipitation happened in different stage of hydrothermal circulation rather than stable. After confirmation of mixing process, a next question is how hydrothermal fluids support dolomite forming after winting. After entering the lake floor, dense hydrothermal influence, then surrounding lake water become the key to decide a stable environment for forming dolomite. Due to nonlinear dynasty behavior, reversing balancing, the mixed fluid in threshold of temperature and salinity would be denser than both the influent and overlying lake water. Meanwhile, Rayleigh number is so high that strong, steady convecting motion within the dense layer and any double diffusion effect on convection is small. Thus, as the dense mixed layer cools, it will remain stable for the dolomite formation. Then we try to calculate cooling time of a stable hydrothermal layer to ensure whether it is sufficient for formation of dolomite. The Moore convection law was used to calculate cooling time scale of influent in thickness of 20 to 40 meters and at a temperature of 200 degrees that deposit the dolomitic laminin and bondings. The result of cooling time scale is over 10 hours, which is comparable to the time required for ordered and stoichiometric dolomite precipitation in lab experiments. Finally, we propose a conceptual model for deposition of the hydrothermal primary dolomite within an active rift basin. During early rifting, free convection of high salinity hydrothermal brines drives crystallization of zeolite within fault. When fault opens, lake water is introduced into the freely convection hydrothermal fluids, leading to nucleation of fine dolomite within the fault. The fault widens, allowing increased discharge of hydrothermal brines, which carry the fine dolomite and zeolite. Fishes A formed in a dense hydrothermal fluid layer after venting, then deposited as laminin and bundles. As the fault further widens, the volumosity of hydrothermal fluids exceeds the treatment of threshold for transport of cross zeolite, discharge of hydrothermal fluids, and transport crystal into the lake basin leads to further accretion of fine dolomite, forming features B. The continued discharge of hydrothermal brines reduces pressure within the deep hydrothermal system, but higher temperature ensures continued single-pass convection of lake water through the fault. The color dense layer of fluid at the lake base continues to precipitate fine dolomite, forming fishes C. Activity terminates, hydrothermal discharge stopped, and sedimentation shifted to lake mudstone. The repetition of the sequence of dolomitic fishes points to post-venting of hydrothermal fluids into lake with longer or shorter hiatuses. And this research provides a new process-based widen for formation of the calcitrate hydrothermal primary dolomite. This is a new modern explain fishes, variations, and geochemical characters within dolomite, and the repeated sequence of dolomite and mudstone in the Orrin Basin. Similar dolomites are repeated in other rift basins in northern China. They may also be found in other rift basins worldwide, which have not been reported yet. So this new model have a wider relevance for dolomite forming in continental rift siting with a combination of a high halide flux and permeable basement rotated fault. Okay, if you want to know more details about our research, welcome to read our papers and discuss with us together. Okay, thank you for your attention. This is my representations. Welcome to ask my question.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting. Okay, so the chat is now open for questions. I expect we've probably got lots to ask about that. That's fascinating. Just whilst we're waiting for those to come in, do you have a sense for how far away from the faults you were getting precipitation? Is there a distance from fault in which you see dolomite?
Sorry, Cathy. Can you again?
Sorry. It's a really nice model. I was wondering if you were able to sort of map a distance from fault that you get convection and precipitation of the dolomite and the different fascies.
Sorry, no, it's not the focus of our work on the fault. Yeah, because we just use the previous research to reveal that fault can develop open or then close. We don't try to demonstrate it by ourselves in the mind. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's fine.
We focus on the dolomite. We think that if this fault system can occur in the other rift basin, it also can happen in Orrin Basin. We think so. Right. Okay.
So, thank you. Just a quick announcement. If Highway is in the room, can he please move to the green room, please? That's just a quick call from Stephen, Highway, to go to the green room. Do we have any more questions?
Show map with thickness. Okay, I see that from Fiona. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, showed map. Okay. Whilst we wait, see if there's any more, do you have any idea from the modern hydrothermal vents that you showed in East Africa, what sort of composition those carbonates are, say in the East Africa Rift?
This part, these maps.
Yeah, these carbonate precipitates, are they, how much dolomite is in there, do you know?
To be honest, they have mining dolomite in the carbonate chimney, because we think that maybe the hydrothermal fluid composition is less mechanism, or maybe they have the more sulfate in the fluid composition, so they can't form the dolomite, replacement by some of the calcite and ignolite. So it is in our research, we saw that the composition of hydrothermal fluids is really important to form the dolomite.
Yeah.
So we just saw this in the northern China. Maybe I guess anywhere some of the dolomite have been reported. Maybe it's the similar with other dolomite, but the people think that it's a replacement or from the other region. That's all.
Okay, no, that's really interesting, fantastic. Okay, I think in that case, given that you are working for the rest of this section, thank you very much. That was fantastic, and I'm actually going to hand over to you now.
Okay.
So now it's the next speaker.
Okay, I will stop sharing. Sorry, wait a moment. Yeah. Okay, next talk this will given by Reinhard Weidlich from the University of Fribourg, and his talk, the title is Morphological and Geochemical Characterization of Seep carbonates in the carbonates. So welcome to him, give us a talk.
Hey. So I will just start sharing. So can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see that.
Thanks. So thanks for the introduction and welcome to my talk about rather poorly known seep carbonates in the southeastern Mediterranean Sea. So the first question for us was, why do we study seep carbonates at all? And there are two questions actually, because carbon is not brought only anthropogenically in the deep sea, but also by hydrocarbon seepage. And some of this carbon coming up to the seafloor is mineralized by sulfate reduction and anaerobic oxidation of methane. Another question was, what is the timing of the seep carbonate formation? So can we link the seep carbonate formation to other processes which are tectonically driven or climatically driven? And in this study, actually, we will be talking about the mapping of the different macromorphologies in the southeastern Mediterranean Sea, and also about the paragenesis of the autogenic carbonate phases and what's the difference between the macromorphologies that we can find. So the study area, as I said, is in the southeastern Mediterranean Sea. So we are located around here. That's Italy, Egypt, and Israel. So we are basically at the shelf of Israel, looking on the top of the Palmachim disturbance here. The second working area was the Nile Channel, and the third one was within the Levant Basin in a small pockmark. And we could identify actually three different morphologies: the crusts, which are mainly appear at the northern flank and on the top of the Palmachim disturbance. As you see, there are some tubes and nodules cemented together, then overgrown by small cold water corals or also bigger soft corals. While we can find at the bottom of the Palmachim disturbance in the Nile Channel, like meter-sized solitary chimneys. And in the Levant Basin, we can find more like hard ground building pavements, which are associated also to the carbonate chimneys also. So we were looking at XRD measurements at first, so we could identify lots of high magnesium calcite around here and low magnesium calcite. Also, we could identify aragonite and quartz and minor amounts of dolomite also. In some samples, as you can see here, the dolomite amount is up to around 30%, while we have in the other samples just like minor amounts and very high amounts of aragonite and magnesium calcites. So looking at the carbonate crust itself, these are two samples that were taken during the AGEO cruise in 2016. So these are like cemented nodules or big tubes together, and they were found here during those dive, and we mapped all the carbonates that we found actually. And now looking at one of those cemented tubes, we can see that we have a high magnesium calcite matrix, and then within the matrix there are small low magnesium calcite breccias and also some pores that are filled by aragonite cements, which are partly replaced already by another high magnesium calcite phase. And everything else is actually overprinted by framboidal pyrites. So looking at the other samples of the crusts, we can also find some tubes. And a zoom in on those tubes, we can see that this is more like a high magnesium calcite microsporite instead of a low magnesium calcite that we can see in the breccias. This is also higher in magnesium content than the high magnesium calcite matrix. So this is around 20% magnesium already, so quite high. And we could furthermore see in those carbonate crusts cyclic aragonite growth, which is then disturbed by dissolution horizons, which we can see here, or also by iron manganese crusts and then already overgrown again. So this is all in here. So in the end, we can just say that we had the high magnesium calcite matrix at first, and then breccias of low magnesium calcite, and then luminescent high magnesium calcite concretions, and afterwards the aragonite growth, and also the framboidal pyrites and oxidation of those in the iron manganese crusts around. In some cases, we also have bio-erosion features, which I don't show in this presentation actually. So coming to the carbonate chimneys, we took a big sample of this huge solitary chimney, which was found within the Nile Channel. So in here, at the flanks, we could mainly find carbonate pavements. So we have a high magnesium calcite sediment matrix again, and then low magnesium calcite replacements around here, and then aragonites fens growing around. And this low magnesium calcite replacement is luminescent compared to the non-luminescent aragonite and the non-luminescent matrix around. The replacements and the aragonite fens are covered by an iron manganese crust. And then we also have some small barite crystals around here, which were forming within the sediment matrix. In the more inner parts, we also have the low magnesium calcite replacements, which are luminescent, and then also aragonite growth around here with dissolution horizons around, which are dull to bright luminescent, so another phase. And then here, as you may see, some aragonite crystals growing again. And so from macromorphological view, we can see like three different phases of three different cycles of growth, where we have one cycle here, then a second cycle here, in the third cycle with the luminescent aragonite around here. Coming to the carbonate pavements, so they are, as I said before, like hard ground building structures. That's one sample that I took actually. And we can distinguish three major phases in here: a low magnesium calcite microspherite all around here, then a luminescent high magnesium calcite micrite. And within this micrite, we can find small dolomite crystals, which are non-stoichiometric. And within one band of those carbonate pavements, we could also find some pelloids around. So rather a sediment matrix, which is high magnesium calcite, and aragonite, which is growing pore lining from this. So in other parts of the carbonate pavements, we couldn't really find any more sediment matrix, as it was completely replaced by the low magnesium calcite microspherite or the dolomite and high magnesium calcite already. So in this case, we can see here already again that we had a high magnesium calcite sediment matrix, which was then replaced by a low magnesium calcite microspherite. And then we have the luminescent high magnesium calcite micrite and the dolomites, which are then partly overprinted by iron manganese crusts. And in the latest part, we have aragonite crystals growing, as I showed before. And then afterwards, we had also some bioerosion, which you can see here quite well during all of the carbonate pavements around. So in the end, we had measured the different phases with stable isotopes, delta 13C, so carbon isotopes, and oxygen isotopes. And we can see here that we have a lot of values of around 0. And this is more like the sediment matrix. And we have like then highly depleted values of up to -55 around, which is linked to the aragonite. And then we have like phases in between, which are more likely mixing phases between dolomite and micrite or dolomite and or micrite and aragonite in the pavements. So in the end, we can say that all autogenic carbonate phases exhibit hydrocarbons as carbon source. So we will find out later what kind of hydrocarbons that is, if it's methane or if it's something different. And the aragonite phases are the most depleted phases in delta 13C that we can find, while the dolomites are less depleted, possibly due to the mixing. And the chimneys and crusts reveal recurrent seepage activity, while the pavements show just one flux. And also the chimneys and the pavements, as they are overgrowing each other, might be linked to a certain process, while the carbonate crusts are on a different spot and maybe linked to several different other processes. And so thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you for giving us a really interesting talk. Is any questions for this research? Okay, I have a question about your research. Yeah, from the carbon isotopes of your carbonate, I found it's really low. I think it is the, this figure. I think this the lower carbon isotopes are related to the micromebial activity. Do you think so?
I think so too. But for this, we will do some lipid biomarker analysis to be sure that we have some microbial activity going on. and also what kind of microbial activity and where the methane source is actually, or the hydrocarbon source, if it's more biogenic or if it's more thermogenic hydrocarbons that we can find in there.
Okay. Do you have some evidence from your rocks can see the microbial activity?
Yes, some of the rocks were actually overgrown by some kind of paved by some kind of microbial mats, so dark grayish mats, which were found next and on top of some of the carbonates also.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your replying. Do you have any questions about this research? Please type on your chart. Yeah.
There's a question from Fiona in the chat, from Fiona Whitaker. She says, thanks, Reinhard. It's a really interesting study. Any idea about precipitation temperatures?
Precipitation temperatures. So I don't have any proof of hydrothermal activity, so I think it's more like an ambient temperature of the seawater. So it's around 13 to 15 degrees Celsius where those carbonates were taken from.
Any more? I have a question if whilst we're waiting for see if there's any more. Have you any idea what sort of depth these are coming from? So the hydrocarbon or the methane is coming from? Did I miss that?
Not really, actually.
No.
So I can check this and come back to you later.
Yeah, it's just interesting whether you knew much about what was underneath in terms of the stratigraphy and the strata, or whether, yeah, just interested to know how deeply they've been coming up, or whether you could track it back to any underlying, say, hydrocarbon reservoir or something. There's one more question from Fiona here. Do you think the locations linked to the discharge of continental groundwater, for example, influenced by the canyon feature?
I haven't thought about this actually. So it could be the case, I think. So in other parts of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, more in the north, like around Cyprus, they have linked the carbonate pavement formation to more brine-like structures. So some kind of mixing of different water sources. So this could be an option, actually.
She's just added to that, are the seeps where you find them and where you look for them?
So there was a cruise before in 2011 where they have found already seep carbonates, and then we had like places where to search for them actually in the next cruise where we found them.
Okay, we're a little bit ahead of time. Does nobody has any more questions? No? Okay, in which case, thank you very much, Reinhard.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, that was fantastic, really interesting. Really nice follow on from Zhe's talk as well. So really good couple of talks now on venting and seeps on the sea floor. Okay, and we're going to have a slight change of theme in a moment. So if you wouldn't mind just taking your talk down.
Okay, I will just stop the sharing.
Stephen, do you want to wait and give everyone 5 minutes so that we run to schedule? Just thinking in case people are turning up specifically for.
I think so. I mean, if you want to have any kind of general discussion, this might be a nice time to just place on where we're up to.
Yeah. Has anybody else got any? So I've got some thoughts from.
Fiona.
Yeah, Fiona. Yes. Yeah. So interesting contrast between marine and lacustrine seeps. Is anybody, I mean, is there anybody else here who's got any experience of working in these?
If anybody would actually like to speak, because means we've got a couple of minutes, just raise your hand and I'll turn your microphone on, because that'll be easier than a chat. If anybody's got an opinion they would like to throw out to the floor. With Cathy's permission.
Absolutely. It's not very easy to spot hands, so I'll rely on you, Stephen, to help me.
I could kick off because I can turn myself on, so I've got unrequited privileges or whatever. No, I'm really interested in the mineralogy and how much the mineralogy of these different seeps reflects the interaction between the overlying water, whether that's a deep freshwater lake or seawater, and how much that end member of the mixing that occurs is controlling the mineralogy versus the composition of the deeper groundwaters or fluids that are discharging in these vents. So I'm kind of interested, I've really enjoyed Reinhard's talk, and I'd be interested in hearing from anyone else who's worked on similar or contrasting seeps.
I think we've got a lot to learn here from the mining community as well. And I think, you know, in terms of their knowledge of SEDEX in particular, and I think we've probably moved away from sort of working with some of these guys in the past. And we've, Jack, I don't know if Jack's here now, but Jack Stacey tomorrow will give a talk on some of his work in the Cambrian. And there's links being made there between hydrothermal venting and microbial communities and biogenic activity, and as well as mineralization and potentially dolomitization. I mean, we think dolomitization is certainly associated with that. So I think, you know, the idea that you might get sulfide mineralization, lead zinc mineralization associated with some of these vents, as well as dolomite, and the spectrum of different carbonate minerals is really, you know, something perhaps we can revisit and think about in a bit more detail. If anybody else has any experience of these settings. We've got a hand up, Annaline.
Annaline, yeah.
Stephen, can unmute Annaline?
Yeah, sorry, I was exploring a bit where to find hands. So I think it's also very interesting to see this difference between those marine settings and lacustrine settings. And a big effect of what we know from the Afar compared to, for example, the Eastern Mediterranean is really the volume and fluxes with the basement. So the volume of water you bring in, on the one hand, in the rift basin, you have also a water runoff, which can also have a big impact, but then also the interaction with your basement. So in a rift basin, and it was my question to Zhe, do you don't see, or what's the influence of your hydrothermal fluids with the magma and volcanic material? So alkaline, subalkaline magmas, for example, this has a big effect in the Afar, and it's resetting the geochemistry of your rift basin at an initial stage, which is in no way comparable with what you have in any marine basin in terms of geochemistry. And a big question I have there is how much you reset your geochemistry in your initial lacustrine rift basin at that point. So also the strontium isotopes, for example, they get reset completely. So did you see that? So a lot is different questions in ones, of course. So.
Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of what you see within your lacustrine setting? I think it's a very good question. I think there is potentially a lot of I think different basins. There's varying degrees of fluid rock interaction and resetting. We can't hear you.
Well, actually, we don't know all the hydrothermal fluids can carry how much the chemical basis for the dolomite, but we can compare it with the modern lake water. And we think if the lake water can carry enough the magnesium, you know that in the lacustrine shape, we use the chemical elements to simulate how much the hydrothermal fluids can carry the character. So it's really hard for people to know the old dolomite, how exactly the chemical elements can provide for the old dolomite. But maybe if we can find the modern dolomite in the rift basin, maybe we can take that. So that's I thought, yeah.
Okay, that was great. Thank you, and thanks, Emily. I think maybe something we pick up in the discussion rooms as well later, because I think there's a lot that we can talk about here. So I think now we need to move on to the next speaker. So we have Johan Le Goff from Bordeaux. Johan, you're able to share your screen? Thank you. Into full screen mode. Johan's going to talk about strontium sorting and calciturbidites.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks to the organizers of this carbonate meeting. Very appreciate this free event that allowed to spread the research, and yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Johan Le Goff, and my research topic is mainly focused on carbonate slope. So you have two examples of this carbonate slope on screen. On the left-hand side, you have a fossil example of carbonate slope from the Upper Cretaceous series of Albania with nice turbidites and mass transport deposits. And on the right-hand side, you have a modern example in the Bahamas with deep sea survey. And as you can see, some escarpment in the upper slope. So that's two examples of slope system, modern, ancient, and the title and the subject of my talk today is focused on the strontium sorting in calciturbidites. So why is strontium important? As you probably know, strontium is used as a proxy for paleoenvironmental reconstructions, such as temperature. For example, corals are what you use to reconstruct temperature with strontium. It's also used in carbonate system to reconstruct sea level. And I have here an example from Counts et al. 2018 in the Mozambique Channel, where they studied in deep sea sediment core the strontium content and aragonite content to reconstruct sea level. So as you can see, the excursion of high strontium values correspond to high sea level. So why is that? Actually, because strontium substitutes to calcium in shallow water setting. So when the platform top is flooded, then you have an export of fine grain particles that are strontium rich. That's called high stand shedding, and it has been described as early as 1985. So this works pretty well, like for this core, in ooze-dominated successions. But SR signals is not really investigated in calciturbidites. So what is a calciturbidite? Basically, that's a downslope directed current that mixes sediment and water, and it links several environments. So basically, in tropical carbonate system, you have a production of diverse bioorganisms on the shelf. I put there two examples, such as Calcareous alimeda, or a wide range of corals in the shallow water realm. And episodically, these biogenic particles are flushed into the deep sea and finally end up on the basin floor. So the transfer is made through turbidity currents, and there deposits is called turbidite. So you have an example here of a turbidite in a deep sea core retrieved from the Bahamas, and the carbonate particles that were found within this core. So in this talk, we will try to answer two particular questions. The first one is, how do turbidity current sort carbonate grains? And you have here an example of a siliciclastic turbidity current in a flume tank. And the second question is, what's the impact of this grain sorting on the geochemical signature of turbidite, and particularly on strontium? So the study site is situated in the Bahamas. It's Exuma Valley. It's a deep sea submarine valley spread in between Exuma Sound, which is an intra-basin in the Bahamas, and the Atlantic Ocean. So deep sea valley between 2,000 meter and 5,000 meter deep. And on this bathymetric survey, you can see the shallow water area basically producing most of the carbonates, and some canyons linking to Exuma Valley and transferring these shallow water particles into the deep. So during the mission organized by Bordeaux Epoch, we retrieved a certain number of cores within this the actual part of this valley. And this is an example of core. This is KS24, situated in the proximal part of Exuma Valley. That's 40,000 years of sediment record. And as you can see, there is basically turbidites, 32 of them on this sediment core, interbedded with pelagic horizons in blue. So we have 3 times more turbidites during interglacials than during the glacial period. So to go further into the composition of these calciturbidites, we undertook a grain counting of certain turbidites. And what you can see on this busy chart is actually the normalized composition at several stratigraphic positions. So that's one stratigraphic position, for example. That's quite busy, so I will focus only on one turbidite, that's T32. And you have different type of grains. Basically in blue, I represented the pelagic fraction that's made up with pteropods, which are pelagic gastropods, and planktonic foraminifera. At the very base of the turbidite T32, you have less than 5% of the deposit made up with pelagic fraction. And at the top of the same turbidite, you have more than 50% of the deposit made up with the pelagic fraction. You have also other grains like Halimeda, we have seen this in a previous slide, which made something like 10–20% of the deposits. So we have a grain sorting in these turbidites, which is largely influenced by the particle type. This is the answer to our first question. Second question now, if it works. Oops. So while scanning the sediment core, we looked at the response in terms of strontium calcium ratio. And what you have here is the example of these 3 cores sampled in Exuma Valley from the proximal site with KS24 to the more distal site. Here you have the strontium values in turbidites represented with the red dots, and the blue dots represent the strontium calcium ratio for the pelagic intervals. You also have the D50 grain size represented with black crosses. What we can clearly see on this slide is that nearly every turbidite has very positive excursion of strontium. So I figured this with the red arrows, and as you can see, the presence of turbidites within the core contrasts the geochemical signal. So to go further into the strontium signal, we wanted to understand the relation at the turbidite scale, and for this we took only two data: the strontium calcium ratio and the grain size D50, and we figured out that actually there is a positive correlation between the strontium calcium ratio and the grain size. This is actually very logical, because we have the coarse grain particles coming from the platform, like Alimeda, settling at the base of the turbidite, while at the top we have more pelagic material made up with planktonic foraminifera and pteropods. So when you plot all the data from the three cores, this is still strontium calcium ratio and the grain size, you basically have a trend from the more distal site, which is KS18, towards KS24 with the strongest strontium response. You also have two excursions here, which are pretty interesting for KS16 and KS18 with coarse grain material. This probably comes from the lateral input of the shallow water material. So basically we have proximal area, coarse grain size, SR reach, and distal area, fine grain size, strontium pore. So yeah, all right. I summarized this finding into this sketch, which represents, first of all, the correlation between strontium calcium ratio and grain size, and also the transfer from the platform tops with SR rich grains, mixing with strontium pore pelagic fraction derived from the slope and the basin floor, and the deposits, the turbidite itself, which exposes a geochemical contrast resulting from this sorting. So other example of strontium calcium ratios in the world, I've been looking for this, and I found this very interesting study from Jory et al. 2020, with two cores from proximal setting KS04 and distal setting KS07, and you can see also the concentration in terms of strontium, which is much higher in the proximal setting than in the distal setting. So that's pretty interesting. And when digging into the literature, there is also another interesting example from Milliman, which shows a gradient of concentration of strontium in the Northwest Providence Channel, with nearly 1% of strontium in aragonite towards the western part of the channel, and a decreasing percentage towards the east. He interpreted these discrepancies in terms of different inputs, saying that non-skeletal grains are preferentially coming from the western part and are richer in strontium, while the algal derived strontium is coming from the Little Bahama Bank Lagoon and the Great Bahama Bank Lagoon. So this could create this discrepancy. But actually, in the light of the new data, new bathymetric data, there is a clear slope of the Northwest Providence Channel towards the east. So this slope could also explain the strontium sorting along slope. So to end up this presentation, I'll come up with 3 conclusive remarks on the application of the study of the strontium signal in sediment cores. First of all, the strontium signal in sediment cores allows a clear identification of calciturbidites. It allows also a rapid assessment of the content of these calciturbidite, shallow versus deep marine fraction. And it could also serve for paleoenvironmental reconstruction with the distance from the source. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Reinhard. Johan, that was really detailed talk and really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so the chat is open for questions to Johan. If anybody's got anything they'd like to ask. Whilst we're waiting, I was just wondering, how many ancient examples have you looked at in terms of strontium preservation and whether you see these trends in older carbonates?
How many ancient examples?
Yeah, so in terms of strontium preservation, have you been able to find anything in the literature or not?
No. So this is exclusively a modern example for the Bahamas, and what I found interesting is also to compare with modern studies in the Mozambique Channel and also in other parts of the Bahamas, but I couldn't find any suitable study in the ancient, but that could be actually a development. But yeah, of course, if doing so, we have also to take into consideration the diagenetic effects which might alter the strontium signal.
That's what I was wondering. I just wondered whether, and I guess people aren't recording this, so it's probably very difficult to find examples anyway, but okay, we've got a question from Peter Burgess. Really interesting talk, thank you. Many turbidites, even classic waning dispersive flow examples, which I'm guessing these are, have erosive bases and can therefore incorporate quite a bit of pelagic sediment substrate they flow over. Do you think this might influence your results?
Yes, and it does actually. That's very interesting. So some of these turbidites have erosive bases, and they rip up some part of the basin floor, which is pelagic. And it's very interesting to notice that we have kind of anomalies with strontium pore ratios for this particular mud class.
Thank you. Yeah, follow-on question from Fiona, which was the same direction I was going on, I think, is the preservation potential of the geochemical signature. But as you say,
yeah,
I think,
for sure, that's a big question, and I'm not sure to be able to answer that right now. I'm just trying with modern example with where the genetic effect is supposed to be very small, because we are talking about very young deposits, less than 50,000 years. But I have no idea what it could be in the ancient in ancient example. But that would be very interesting to try this in carbonate turbidites with, for example, XRF laser. There is a lot of new device that would allow this kind of study, I'm sure. But this would need a proper diagenetic study prior to interpretations.
One very quick final one from Lillian Navarro. Nice talk. Do you see any changes in the strontium content between glacial versus interglacial calciturbidites?
Yes, clearly. Well, maybe I can go back to one of the slides.
Yeah, we have about 1 minute, so yeah, you have time just to quickly pop back.
Okay. So actually, this is the best example for KS24.
We can't see your screen,
dating, so you will have to trust me. But this is interglacial and this is glacial. So
we can't. Sorry, Johan, we can't see your screen.
All right. I'm sorry for this. Share screen. Okay. Is it better now?
It's coming up.
All right. So for this KS24, we have actually interglacial from O21, and below is glacial. So from this particular horizon, can see that you have a clear trend towards rising strontium values. So more strontium exported during interglacial.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to stop there.
All right. Thanks to you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Okay, Zhe, do I hand over to you?
The last presentation is from Hanaga Simabrata. His research is about multi-scale syn-emplacement deformation and microstructure features of mixed carbonate-siliciclastic ice transport position. Okay, start sharing your screen. Hanaga, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and start your talk.
Is it good? Can you guys see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Thank you everyone for showing up in my talk. So my research is about multi-scale syn-emplacement deformation and microstructure phases of a mixed carbonate-siliciclastic mass transport deposits, or for convenience, you can just call it mega slump. The Cutoff Formation, Guadalupe Mountains, Texas. In today's talk, we will discuss specifically about the thin section scale deformation. So the big title is actually not that accurate. So please refer to the title below, right here. Please follow my cursor too. And in this talk, I'll demonstrate how spicule grains are oriented in such a way, and we will also discuss about the potential implication of this. Okay, so introduction. In the map below here is the United States, and the red box here sits in the border between Texas and New Mexico states. And if we zoom this in, this is what the Permian Basin looks like. And the green line signifies the edge of the basin. So the outcrop is essentially on the slope part of the basin. And if we zoom this in further, we'll see the orange is the outcrop belt of the Cutoff Formation. So our research focuses on the rest area gully signified by the red circle. We won't dwell for too long in the geological setting because it's not that relevant. We can apply this for any other carbonate deposits around the world. Thin section analysis. So we collected a lot of samples, and some of them are oriented in a sense that we know exactly where the north is, and we also know the top of the bed. And for each of these samples, we cut three-dimensional thin section, and then we also assign code. For example, SR Zane 2 316th means that when we look under the microscope, we are actually looking to the direction of 316th degree with respect to the north. So we have a long bedding plane cut, and then parallel to the microstructure cut and perpendicular to the strike of the microstructure cut. And in this talk specifically, we will focus on this sample, SR Zane 2, the bedding plane cut and the perpendicular to the microstructure cut. For your information, this sample is dominated by asymmetrical microfolds. We can see here in the picture. So this is the thin section image from SR Zane down. So this is the bedding plane cut. Please also pay attention to the cartoon here, because this is the one that highlights the position or the orientation of the thin section. So we can essentially think of this thin section as a mini geological map. Imagine you have micro anticline, and then you slap them with respect to horizontal. This is what you will see. And then we put 70 points. This is essentially similar to point counting, but instead of calculating the composition, we measure the spicule orientations. So for example, in the fields of view B3, 40 times magnification, and we make sure that the magnifications are consistent from field to field. And then we measure, for example, in this case, it's 150 spicules. We try to measure all of them and then plot them into a rows diagram. Also for SR Zane 2 316, this is the perpendicular to the microstructure strike thin section. For this case, we only use 11 points, the same 40 times magnification, measure the spicules and plot them on the Ross diagram. But for this case, we only have like a lot less spicules, and there's an explanation for that actually. We will come back to that later, right? So this is the example of, this is the result of SR Zane along the bedding plan cut, 70 points of observation, and we measure around 6,000 spicule grains. So we can see that the spicule grains are oriented parallel to the strike of the microfolds. And we can see that the spicules actually follows the curvature of the microfoldings, which suggests that the orientation is actually controlled by the mass transport deposits instead of the previously existing process before the mass failure. And the second point of observation is the we have bimodal to chaotic orientations, which are usually prevalent in the crest or the trough of the microstructures. For example, here in the field D2, we see a higher standard deviation of the spicule orientation as compared to the flank. And also, this is another example where we have bimodal. This is because the maximas are actually a combination of the flank orientation from both sides. This is a zoom out version of the flank. We can appreciate how they are more chaotic, if not bimodal. And for the crest area, we see they are more well oriented, following the orientation of the microstructure. And for SR Zane 2 316, 11 fields of view, 338 spicules. We see that the spicule orientations tend to follow the microfold flanks. Most of the microfolds verge to the right, which is 44 degrees with respect to the north. And so do the spicules. We can see that they really follows the trend of the flank, except for several places here and here. They are kind of different, but overall they are verging to the right. Let's take some time to appreciate how well organized these spicules are, following the orientation of the microstructure. So let's talk a little bit about statistical work. So for the SR Zane down, this is the along bedding plan cut, we measured around 5,934 spicules in 70 fields of view. So on average, we get 85 spicules per fields of view, right? And for the perpendicular to microstructure cut, we measured 338 spicules in 11 fields of view, so about 31 spicules per fields of view. This being said, 3 out of 4 spicules in the samples are actually in the sleeping position along the bedding plan, and 1 out of 4 spicules are upstanding, and they are actually verging towards the flow of the megaslump. So in this case, we can actually use the spicules orientation to predict the paleoflow direction of a carbonate MTD. So why should we care? So imagine if we have a bunch of spicules oriented in such a way. The question is, does the orientation give mechanical advantage to a certain direction? For example, if I compress them from this way versus I compress them from the direction of the red arrow. This is especially important in unconventional energy, hydrocarbon, and also secondly, what is the preferential, is that does the orientation of the spicule give preferential fluid flow to a certain direction? And it might also influence the pattern of mineralization. For example, in the figure below here, we see that the this bed is susceptible to mineralization, and we can see the dolomite pattern, the white patches, are actually kind of following the orientation of the spicules and also the microstructure. But one thing is that we have to make sure that this is not the effect of topography. So more investigation need to be done. And so the implication, grain orientation may lead to geomechanical advantage to a certain direction. This is important in assessing fractability of the MTD in unconventional reservoir. And second, grain orientation may lead to preferred fluid flow path to a certain direction. This is important in fluid flow modeling and may also impact mineralization pattern, for example, dolomitization. And third, grain orientation can serve as an alternative method to infer paleoflow direction. This is important in core analysis, especially in cases where we cannot readily identify the attitude of the main slump folds. And the last point, grain orientation may give insight on MTD, mass transport deposits, transport mechanic in general. I mark this point red because I actually don't have enough theoretical basis to back up this claim. So the fourth point is basically based on my intuition. So yeah, look at that loaf-shaped hole in on my sandwich. Yeah, okay, I'm done, but ahead of time a little. So this is my sponsor. Thank you, and yeah, thank you. Please don't hesitate if you have questions.
Okay, thanks. Hanaga gave us a really nice talking. Okay, there is a question from Fiona. Thanks, Hanaga, for very clear talk and now study. Can you tell us more about any links you have seen between grain orientation and mineralization or dolomitization?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So in this big thin section, we can actually see that the white patches, which is mostly dolomite, if not silica. Most of them are dolomite, but some of them are silica. So they go in the orientation of northwest to southeast, which is kind of the same as the orientation of the spicule grains and the microstructures. So if we believe that the spicule orientation may influence a preferential fluid flow to a certain direction, and if we also linked fluid flow to mineralization, in this case dolomitization, it is possible that these pattern is actually also influenced by the spicule orientation, if that makes sense. So in order to test this, we still don't know how to really like unequivocally test this, but we know how to kind of tell if they have influence on preferential fluid flow. So let's go to some of my backup slides. Let me show you. Wait a sec. So imagine if we have spicules with the same density, right? With the same content, 5 spicules on both samples, but one is more oriented while the other is more chaotic. So we can say that the standard deviation of these spicules is lower than this one, right? So higher standard deviation means lower spicule orientation. Intuitively, the more chaotic spicules will be less favorable and vice versa. So if P value exists, then it should be inversely proportional to the standard deviation of the spicules. And suppose that if we have spicules with equal degree of orientedness, but different spicule density, spicule counts. So this, we have more on here, and in here, half of the masses are just matrix, right? Intuitively, I believe this specimen would be better. Therefore, if p-value exists, it should be also proportional to spicule density, or the fraction of the spicules with respect to the entire mass. So if after we obtain p-value, we can actually plot them to the properties that we want to find out. For example, if it has preferential fluid flow, or K, permeability, or if it has a geomechanical advantage. So my hypothesis, our hypothesis, is that this p-value should be inversely correlated with the permeability to a certain direction, or geomechanical advantage to a certain direction. But we don't have, we have not done this yet. This is just a hypothesis. And probably if we have enough sample, we can also find that different types of microstructures has different p-value. And this actually makes sense because microstructure types reflects the deformation or the strain in the MTD body. So if we believe the orientation of the spicules are influenced by the shear or the deformation, then we might be able to also find the separation of histogram. Yeah, so that's kind of, you are muted.
Okay, the next question from Peter. Do you have any science or even any data on how many sections you need to analyze to get a reliable paleo transport direction?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So far we have actually, oh, sorry, I'll share it again. So far we have actually observed in the outcrop that we have a lot of horizontal bedding, but they actually have microstructure. So our sense is that we just cannot see the slump. You know, if you have a slump fault facing that way, all you can see is just the horizontal bedding. So in that sense, if we apply that to a core, if you have a core that looks horizontal, but you suspect it might be an MTD, you can just take a thin section. I think 1 or 2 thin section might be enough, because so far we suspect that this is unique to mass transport deposits. Like, it doesn't exist in turbidite, it doesn't exist in any other processes, as far as we know. So 1 or 2 thin section will be reliable, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for your great, interesting research for us. And this is the last one presentation in our session. Thanks to all the presentators gave us the really interesting talk. And then we also have a poster session about the water process and sediments. Welcome to everyone to continue to focus on this session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hand over to Hilary and Chelsea. You're going to chair the poster sessions.
Yes, perfect. So thank you, everybody. I guess we're going to get started right now with the first poster session. So myself and Hilary Corlett will be the co-chairs for today. And Orrin, if you are in the room and can please share your screen, we will have our first presentation by Orrin Bryers from Manchester, who's going to talk to us about kilometre-scale coral carpets on mixed system platforms. Orrin, are you here? Orrin, if you can hear me, you are now a co-host and should be able to unmute yourself and start your video and share your screen.
Yeah, hiya, can you hear me okay?
Great.
Sorry, just an FYI, my laptop is being a bit mad. It's kind of doing lots of strange things, so I'm just going to leave my video off, if that's all right.
Yep,
More
sure.
reasons for it to go crazy. Cool, okay.
No worries.
Thank you.
As long as you can share the screen, I think that's the most important.
Yeah, it should.
And
hopefully it can handle that. Okay. All right, so you should be able to see that. All good?
Yes. Good.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so this project is looking at Lower Cretaceous corals in southwest Morocco. And it's really quite a unique place because the outcrops are laterally extensive for kilometers across the margin. And whereas in other places there are time equivalent corals, but they're actually pretty sparse, just a few hundred meters or small biohubs or biostromes. And it's a great place to basically look at depositional controls in time and space. So looking at allogenic versus autogenic controls. And also it'll be interesting to see what these corals from a greenhouse period can tell us about modern and future corals and how they adapt to environmental changes. So what you're looking at here is a platform top correlation panel on a low relief platform in southwest Morocco. And that little red box is roughly that that correlation from west is basinward. We have this lower down coral level that's localized, followed by non-coral bearing limestones and marls. And then we have a main coral unit here, coral level 2, which is made up of dome stones and plate stones. So dome stones are made of massive and also thick branching corals. Plate stones are made up of thin platy corals. And the matrix they both share is rich in heterozoans. It's echinoids and bivalves, oysters. There's a minor sand component, very fine sand component. There's a lot of mud in those matrices. And the corals are relatively sparse, but the beds are covering along a lateral distance. And that's overlain by a regional hard ground surface and some sandstones and oysters. And the whole formation is approximately in quite a short timescale of 400 to 800,000 years based on other sections. So we're just talking about quickly what controls I suggest. Basically, the allogenic controls related to climate shifts. So the reasons the corals emerge in the platform, suggestive that there's a recovery of carbonate productivity following the Valanginian. We're in a context of global sea level high stand, and the seafloor, the antecedent seafloor is relatively flat, and it might be a reason why you have these aerially extensive growths. But it might also explain some of the strange thickness variations. And then again, we have another climate shift suggested following the corals here, where you have the sandstones coming in, perhaps with increased humidity, and then depauperate oyster communities. However, that doesn't actually explain the short scale changes that we see in fascies and in coral morphology, which are assigned to autogenic controls involving nutrient levels, light availability, changes in the hydrodynamic energy, and also ecological factors such as competition. So I'll discuss these things in the poster. And the key implications of the study are we have some sort of coeval event for the emergence and the demise of corals in the Lower Hotterivian. We've tied some of these events to the Tethys and also Portugal, where we have similar timed events in actually the same ammonite subzone. Whereas local scale variations in this region seem to be controlled by more autogenic factors. And additionally, these low relief, kind of low diversity coral carpets potentially provide a proxy for recovery and demise of corals in response to environmental stress in modern day and also perhaps future coral environments. So yeah, come and see the poster if you're interested. It'd be cool to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Orrin. That was almost bang on 4 minutes. So thanks very much. And if we could have Hollis Nega, please, if you're in the room, share your screen. So our next speaker, Hollis Nega, is joining us from the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly. Are you in the room? There we go. Sharing your screen, perfect. Okay, so if you could give us your 4-minute intro, please.
Okay, hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Today I will talk about one of the most remote areas in the world. This area is known as the Danakil Depression, and it is a geological natural laboratory where tectonic, climatic, and volcanic forces act together to form and structure the basin. The Danakil Depression is located in northern apex of the Afar Triangle, and it is bordered to the west by the Ethiopian Plateau and to the east by the Danakil Alps. It resulted from the continuation of the Red Sea Rift into land. The basin was connected several times to the Red Sea during the Pleistocene and resulting in the deposition of coral reefs along the margins, dated as MI7 and MI5. We have studied 35 reef outcrops along the western margin, but we will present only one reef outcrop, RO, which recorded the best the MI7 coral reef grows, build-up, and demise. This study aims to characterize and understand the paleoenvironmental and sedimentological setting in the marginal Danakil Sea during the growth, build-up, and demise of MI7 coral gull reef units. This allows direct comparison of the coral gull reefs to their counterparts exposed along the Red Sea margins. So when we look at RO, reef outcrop, we can see that it is a well-developed fringing reef attached to a volcanic substrate. It has a thickness of about 12 meters and a lateral extent of approximately 435 meters north-south and 160 meters east-west. It is composed of a reef front, reef crest, reef flat, and a detached back reef. Correlation between the different units shown in figure 3 allowed us to say that the reef is more aggradational instead of being progradational. The first two units constitute one reef growth cycle with a startup phase grading quickly to a keep-up phase. The second reef growth cycle starts with unit 3, unit 4, 5, and 6, making another reef growth cycle. This reef growth cycle starts with a startup, catch-up, and keep-up phase. The two cycles are not interrupted by erosional surfaces or several exposure. This leads to the assumption that the sequences are related to high frequency, low amplitude relative sea level fluctuation. When we compare the MI7 coral gull reefs to their counterpart in the Red Sea margins, the Danakil coral gull reef are better developed and preserved. This could be related to topographical differences or differences in seawater chemistry. For further discussion, I will invite you to my poster discussion session. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. Next, we will have Ahmad Ramdani from KAUST. Ahmad, if you are in the room, please share your screen and turn on your mic.
Sure. Can you see my screen now?
We can see it great. Yep. So 4 minutes, and we look forward to hearing about the schmatoporoid and coral-rich species.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as the introduction says, my poster is about 3D outcrop study to resolve meter-scale interwell depositional heterogeneities of stromatoporoid coral-rich facies in the Hanifa Formation in Saudi Arabia. So, the rationale behind this research is the late Oxfordian to early Cambrian Hanifa Formation in Saudi Arabia is deposited in 1,000-kilometer wide shallow marine carbonate settings. And among the facies within this 1,000-kilometer platform is the stromatoporoid coral facies, which in the subsurface reservoir is characterized by high porosity and high permeability. Understanding the fundamental process and factors that control the 3D spatial distributions of these facies is important, since subsurface data does not have both resolution or data density to well resolve these facies. Therefore, using outcrop analog, which located in Wadi Birik, Saudi Arabia, which is located in this first map on the red circle, we would like to investigate and document the spatial distributions of these facies and infer some fundamental processes and factors that control the distributions of these facies, which ultimately we can bring back this information to the subsurface reservoir as an analog. So since depositional heterogeneity of carbonate sedimentary bodies are in 3 dimensions, our approach for this outcrop analog study is also in 3 dimension. We are using integrated multiple geological and geophysical dataset. Essentially, we combine 3D drone photogrammetry and measured section for a continuous outcrop facies investigation. And then we extend the outcrop investigation into 3-dimensional domain behind the outcrop using ground penetrating radar, seismic, and near surface well data. Since this study is an ongoing project, so this poster, we are going to show you our first iterations of the result, basically our initial result, where using statistical distributions of the build-ups from the outcrop investigation, we attempt to model the development of the stromatoporoid coral build-up facies in a 500-meter scale grid. And the snapshot of this first iteration of this model can be shown here in the lower picture on the left, where circular shaped stromatoporoid coral build-ups congregate into a larger 10 to 100 meters pseudo-ellipsoid complex with preferential northwest-southeast lineation, and which we believe later on in the poster, I will explain it a bit more detail, where this potential preferential lineation and morphology is controlled by hydrodynamic energy, especially the currents. And using this fundamental process, we apply this information to build a 3D outcrop-based facies model that can be utilized to analyze the effect of the morphology and distributions of the stromatoporoid coral facies into the reservoir flow behavior in the subsurface analogous reservoir. And with that, I would like to invite you to attend my poster so that we can discuss some more about our methodology and our initial results. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing that. And for our final poster, I'm going to call Victor Sotelo up from Ecopetrol in Bogota, Colombia. And he will be presenting a poster on carbonate prospectivity in the Guara Basin. Sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that for sure. And he's presenting this on behalf of Mary Ragosa, who is unable to make it today. So Victor, are you there? There we go.
Yes. Yes. Good morning. Good morning. I'm ready.
So if you want to just share your screen, then
for sure. Okay.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Take it away.
Okay. Good morning. The study area is located in Colombia, in the northwest corner of South America, in a compressive regime controlled by the subduction of the Caribbean plate under the South American plate. The basin is also affected by an important strike slip deformation component. The focus of this project was to evaluate the carbonate facies and its associated genesis using the data of the rocks outcropping on the onshore area and those rocks drilled by wells, onshore and offshore wells. Doing this along with detailed well correlation, biostratigraphic documentation, seismic interpretation, and also doing core and coating analysis. This chronostratigraphic chart made just from wells on offshore and onshore wells is showing the most important in situ carbonate ramp in the lower Guajira Basin. The bricks are the symbol for the carbonate ramp, and as you can see, the age dated for each well vary. Vary from Eocene to Upper Miocene. However, detailed seismic interpretation and well correlation allow us to interpret that the most consistent age is Middle Miocene, matching with 3 high system tract events that you can see in the Hacks curve. The other intervals different from the BRIUGs are siliciclastic sediments mixed with carbonate debris, whose source are the carbonate rocks outcropping in onshore areas. The main result of this study was the recognition of four carbonate platform accumulations within the Cenozoic sequence of the Guajira Basin, for which the main depositional controls were tectonics, eustasy, and inherited depositional profile. From base to top, we have the late Eocene carbonate banks. This unit outcrops in the eastern flank of the Cocinas Range and is composed mainly by mollusks. There is no well that drills similar carbonate banks in subsurface. Second, the hermatypic coral reefs outcropping toward south of Harara Range and developed during late Oligocene. Until now, coral reefs haven't been found by hydrocarbon wells in the subsurface. Third, and the most important, because in that unit we have an important gas field, is in the Middle Miocene, a white carbonate ramp, and the gas field was a discovery made in the 70s by Texaco, and this ramp is dominated by larger benthic foraminifera, and the platform development coincides in age with a global warming. Most part of the ramp is in onshore zone and covers around 2,700 square kilometers in area.
Okay.
Yes.
I think we might have to stop there, but if you just want to wrap up in 5 seconds.
Yes. Finally, just an interval of coquinas that was found onshore and offshore areas in the North Guajira for the Upper Miocene Pliocene section. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And just before everyone heads into discussion, we just have a quick announcement from Fiona Whitaker. And thanks all to the poster presenters. We look forward to discussing your posters in the discussion session.
Yeah, thanks.